So that leads, of course, to the whole camp. Most of us talk about the Battle of Armageddon. There's no Battle of Armageddon, by the way. That's a misnomer. The battle is over Jerusalem. Armageddon is simply where the troops are gathering. I'll call it the Armageddon campaign. It's also called the Day of Vengeance. That's the part that Jesus did not read at the synagogue in Nazareth in Luke 4. He stopped at the comma. The remainder is what we're going to see here. The first step is they're going to assemble the armies. Just as England was the assembly for the Normandy invasion, Armageddon, the valley of Jezreel, is where the armies gather to go against Jerusalem. That's the target. There really isn't a battle. It's the valley of Jezreel. It's a staging area. And so, thus, and they're coming against. What's bizarre about this, apparently, those armies that are gathering from all over the world are knowingly gathering against God the Father and against his Messiah. And God's view of all this is one of mockery. Psalm 2 makes fun of this futile attempt of the kings there, and also Joel 3. The second step is the destruction of Babylon, incidental to this particular agenda. But there is a key power center at Babylon on the banks of the Euphrates. And I encourage you to check that out because it's a litmus test. If our view is correct, there's a way to test it by simply watching your daily newspaper. But I'll let you check that on your own. Because we believe that Babylon is destined to be destroyed in a way that it never has been, which means it is yet to emerge on the scene in order to be destroyed, the way Isaiah and Jeremiah detail very colorfully. Let you check that out on your own. The next step is the fall of Jerusalem. That's what the Antichrist is after. It fell in 70 AD. It's going to fall again. Luke 21 is Jesus predicting the first fall. Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, predicts this one. Over half the city will be taken into slavery by Gentile forces from the valley of Jezreel. But then the armies go to Basra. Why? Because the remnant following Jesus' instructions, when the abomination of desolation, they flee to Basra. So these armies then are diverted to go after the remnant in Basra. Jeremiah 49, Micah 2, and so on. The world army pursues the remnant, which has fled to the mountains of Edom in Jordan. So that leads to 5, which is what Hosea is going to dealing with here, the national journey. The required confession that makes the first few verses of chapter 6 will be formally petitioned. And for the pleading of the Messiah, Zechariah 2:1, they shall look upon me whom they pierced, Jesus says. That's what he's referring to. That unlocks the final 3 days of the campaign of the pleading of Hosea 6, verse 1 to 3, and the national confession of Isaiah. Isaiah 53, by the way, hasn't been fulfilled yet. We always look at it as it has. Isaiah 53 is really describing their discovery of that prophecy, interestingly enough. And that's fulfilling Romans 11, verse 25 to 27. And there's a bunch of other verses that'll be in your notes for you that want to really dig into this and get this in perspective. But that all leads, of course, to the second coming of Christ. And he comes to the city of Basra. And he's covered with blood, the blood of his enemies. Read Isaiah 63, the first half dozen verses. That person there is none other than the Messiah. It's interesting that his armies are not involved in the fighting. He fights them alone. He doesn't need any help. He destroys them. And Teman and Mount Paran are also the same mountain range in the vicinity of Basra and Edom. The breaker, the king, Jehovah the king are all the same person in that verse, Micah 2, and so on. And that leads, of course, to the second coming of Christ, the Shekinah glory, the clouds of heaven. In Acts, it says he's going to come in like manner. It didn't say to the same place, by the way. And the armies are plural. Revelation 19 has armies plural. Are there angels? That's what Matthew 16 seems to imply. Are the saints? That's what Jude 14 and 15 say. Maybe it's both. But don't assume he needs our help as an army. He fights at Basra alone. Isaiah 63 makes that point. And there's a bunch of other references to this. But at Basra, it's the tents of Judah first, and then Jerusalem. Then he comes to Jerusalem, and then he goes from the valley of Jehoshaphat to Basra, in effect. The Antichrist is powerless before Christ. There's plenty of verses on that. The Antichrist's armies are destroyed at Basra and then at Megiddo. And it's interesting, how far is it from Basra to Megiddo? It happens to be, Revelation 14:20 says 1,600 furlongs. Remember that in Revelation? How far is it from Jezreel to Petra? 1,600 furlongs. That's kind of fun. There's nothing approximate, nothing allegorical here. This is all quite explicit, interestingly enough. And that finally leads to the ascent that we all know the verse out of Zechariah 14, that his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives and it shall split, and that's the big victory, and things change, right? Okay, big deal.